This is part 2 in our series about how to steal money from government. Washington State Edition, we're going to be focusing on how to operate a grant grifting operation here. Thank you for watching. My name is Glen Morgan, and this is We the Govern. So, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be talking about how to steal money from government. This is part 2 in the series, and today I'm going to be talking about grant grifting. I know I promised that I would address this issue in the past, and I've occasionally touched on it in previous stories, but it's something I've witnessed for many, many years, and it's important that you learn how this operates, because after all, this is how millions and millions and hundreds of millions and billions of dollars that you pay into government, this is how it all vanishes, and you wonder why nothing happens. So let's talk about how this whole process and origin of this video really came about. And part of it is that I've oftentimes felt that if you're going to go into organized crime or become a criminal and that's kind of your objective, why would you waste your time in the private sector? And it's much better to go into government because nobody's really watching, you get away with a lot more, and you have an institutional operation there that's mostly designed to protect itself and conceal your bad activities. Now, I always kind of like this quote because this is a quote that was given by former President Truman, and it was an honest public servant can't become rich in politics. Now, that's sort of silly to even think about now. After all, we see plenty of people that we elect to go to D.C. who essentially don't really apparently have any other source of income, and suddenly they come out multimillionaires after only a few years back in D.C. And I am sure that is completely innocent and totally explainable in some honest way. But then again, is it really? So let's talk about some of the ways that we've addressed this type of issue in the past. Historically in our country, corruption there's nothing new to it. You can see old stories, old cartoons, old images of various cons and grant schemes. Not so much grant schemes, it's really more about kickback schemes and bribes and all kinds of things that have happened in state history. Usually involved exchanging money for services or exchanging money for votes or some type of operation like that. We think of Tammany Hall, we think of corruption in the Civil War with contracts for military supplies, all kinds of corruption stories that come out of the exploring the West or the explosive growth of government in the late 1800s. Early 1900s, this is kind of a very common theme. And yet, the reality is bribery, that kind of old-fashioned traditional bribery that you think of when people think of government corruption, that is not really how it happens. Because if you're going to be offering cash bribes to elected officials, most of them are not stupid enough to actually take it. And the reality is it's a good way to end up in handcuffs for both players. So as a general rule, there's a little bit more sophistication involved today if you actually want to get money or special deals back from government. Now, we're going to be addressing something a little bit different than just special kickbacks or contracts that government gives out. And so instead, we're going to be talking about, again, one of the ways, the many ways that government operates, particularly at a local level, and I'm focused on Washington State here, and how the operation actually works behind the scenes. How do people come in and actually take so much money from government, and how does that actually work? So, and by the way, I mean, one thing to kind of remember about all this is that no matter how much reform there is, there's always some way of people coming up with new ideas to kind of roll up that reform or institute new ways of corruption. It's kind of it's always this cat and mouse game that you see with law enforcement and criminals. The same thing's really going on in government. And the bigger government is, the worse it gets. The bigger government becomes, the more bloated the bureaucracy, the more incompetent. Incompetency, of course, is the dominant existence of government, just incompetent at all times, and that of course conceals just a mountain of corruption and allows a lot of these things to happen. And the other thing to remember is that when it comes to grants in particular, we're really talking about how wrong is wrong, no matter what, if everybody's doing it, and yet it's the same thing that we see happening everywhere. So what is a grant? What are we really talking about? There's a lot of cash floating around out there from government. This is a definition from Wikipedia. It's a fairly complex one, and this is probably a more traditional application of the definition now. A grant is a fund given by an entity of some kind, often a public body, charitable foundation, or a specialized grant-making institution to an individual or another entity, usually a nonprofit organization, sometimes a business or a local government body, for a specific purpose linked to public benefit. And unlike loans, grants are not to be paid back. Now, a simpler way, I think, is just to look at this as a sum of money given by a government or other organization, and we're usually talking about government here, for a particular purpose, well, like say a research grant, something like that. Regardless of how you define it, there's a lot of people on the gravy train who want to get some. And when you're talking about grants, a lot of times people think about it from an education standpoint or individual grants. The COVID grants that were kicked out, ostensibly under the guise of helping solve the COVID crisis or helping people get through that crisis. And as we know now, the vast majority, huge percentage of that actually was just wasted and stolen in all kinds of schemes and cons, very few of which have been prosecuted so far. So just tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars just flushed down the drain. And that's kind of the way grants operate. Now, that's a fairly big application when you're looking at the federal level. But when we look at the local level, a lot of federal money gets sent to state and local governments, and then those governments in turn issue it or pass through that cash to people who apply for these grants, usually nonprofits or small organizations. So what can you do to get on the grant grifting gravy train and be part of the kickback schemes that seem to exist at just basically all levels of government today? And this is something I've witnessed, again, so many times, endless times in Washington State. And you can witness this too. Every time you go to a city council or a King County or either a county council meeting or a city council meeting or a county commission meeting, you can watch this happen, usually in the consent agenda before almost every public meeting, because these grants are getting kicked out right and left. So first you have to come up with a grant plan. Come up with something to do, something that you think you can justify when you go to government. Preferably, since most of these places are pretty progressive, lefty-leaning, you got to come up with something that's going to be for the kids or for the environment, solving global warming or global cooling or global climate change, whatever you want, saving endangered species, helping the homeless, or whatever other progressive cause you want to come up with. It really doesn't matter too much what it is. You may have to tailor that to the specific grant that you're applying for, but just make sure the word salad that you're using in that application in some way applies to some kind of acceptable kind of consensus lefty-leaning bandwagon that's going on right now. If you do that, that will get you on the highway and you'll be moving down that grant grifting operation very, very quickly. Second thing you need to do, or third thing in this case, is you really need to go and find a local government that's particularly receptive to those types of grant applications. Preferably try to find a place like the city of Olympia or Seattle or Port Townsend or Bellingham or someplace like that that basically is long history of just squandering taxpayer dollars like it's going out of style. They kick out grants for almost any excuse that comes along and don't expect them to do any background checks or verification that you're doing anything. And they have a long history of incompetence and screwed up grant applications where cash goes out and really nothing happens. These are the places you want to focus on. Now, these cities aren't alone. I picked on 4 here, but trust me, there are hundreds where that came from. So you will find some city like this near you that you can make that application to, and they won't even notice it. It'll just be one of hundreds, and you will be on the gravy train. So then you need to make your pitch, ask for the cash. Oftentimes this is done with bureaucrats. You don't even really talk to the elected officials initially, and so you really just need to get through the bureaucratic process, and if there's any funny business or clarification that needs to happen, it's usually done at that level. The bureaucrats are where that initial gatekeeper sort of operation exists, so get familiar with who they are, find out what their hot buttons are, find out what they want to hear. Oftentimes they view this pile of cash they're going to kick out as just part of their job description, and if you make it seem easy and fun and rewarding to give it to you, that's what they'll do. So then the next step, of course, is tell them what they want to hear, right? Because if you claim that you can solve whatever that problem is, you're going to solve homelessness, you're going to solve global warming, you're going to save the environment, you're going to save the children, of course, whatever the progressive cause sounds cool, and whatever's currently in vogue in that city council or that county commission meeting, that's all you have to do. Just basically pitch to them what they want to hear. Fill out the paperwork correctly, make your pitch. Sometimes you have to go up to public comment and do a little spiel there about how awesome your effort's going to be and how important it is that they give you this money and how well you will spend that money. If you can do that, then you're going to be in good shape. And just like hundreds of other organizations every single month, you will be able to take your cash and run away with it. Because unfortunately at that point in time, there's really no auditing or verification as to whether you're going to actually do what you said you're going to do. You'll have to fill out a piece of paper at some point in the process that says you did, or at least says you spent the money the way that you said that you were going to. But of course, you're not going to solve global warming. You're not going to help the children. You're certainly not going to reduce the homelessness situation in your community, and you're probably not going to solve whatever other progressive cause that you claim to be solving, because after all, failure is the highway to success in the grant grifting game. And success is certainly not the objective. That's, of course, what you say it is, but that's not actually how you keep the gravy train rolling. You got to make sure failure is actually really important, because after you fail, you get to claim success, and then you can go and apply for it next year. If you actually do succeed, the problem goes away, and you can't just keep applying for that same grant over and over again. Of course, each time you apply, you want to increase the amount of money you ask for. So grants, go and get it. It's a great way to get money. And it's much simpler and easier than trying to bribe your way to get a contract or give campaign contributions to get a contract. Not to say that some campaign contributions to the right elected officials might not make this a little bit easier process, because it probably will. It'll pave the way to being able to get those grants if you need them. But mostly when we're talking about the grant grifting game, its failure is the primary feature. It's not a bug. It's really about making sure you never solve whatever problem you're getting grant money for. And as long as you continue to fail, they'll probably keep writing bigger checks each and every year. Because the people giving you the cash, they don't really care anyway. It's not their money. It's taxpayer money, and they get to give it away. And they think that's their job, is to give it away, not so much make sure that it gets spent well. And of course, nobody's paying any attention. There's no real audit function in government. You have to turn in a piece of paper at the end of the day, eventually when you blow through all the cash and you're coming up for your next application. But it's not like the state auditor is really going to care. So unless you took that money and were really ostentatious about it, started bragging on Facebook about your Hawaiian vacations, they're probably not going to look. They don't want to look too closely. It's a big hassle to do that. And it's just one of those things that nobody's going to be looking, so you'll get away with it. And of course, you must have a plan just in case, in that off chance you actually have some good government person locally who's paying attention, or perhaps one of your grant competitors that you might have beat out for that pile of cash. They might attack you, and so you have to make sure that you have a plan to attack them. And after all, you want to attack anybody who dares to question your motives or competency. Claim that they're attacking the progressive causes that you are out there to represent. After all, questioning you is just like attacking the children, or burning down the environment, or throwing more homeless on the street, right? That's basically the theory, and that's your media plan. It doesn't have to be that complex. It's about as exotic as you need to get, and then you can apply and kind of run that same operation over and over again. Because it's impressive how much corruption can be concealed by the ocean of incompetence in which it floats when you're dealing with local government. It's really stunning. Anybody who doesn't know this just hasn't looked, because if you bother to look, you're going to see this everywhere. Incompetence, of course, is the default position of government and bureaucracy. And so that just covers, this ocean of incompetence just hides a lot below the surface. And I would consider most of that corruption. And that's how the grant grifting gravy train works. You get on it, though, and you can just keep those wheels going and apply year after year. Well, look at the Seattle City Council meetings, or Olympia City Council, or a lot of these other city councils, Burien for that matter. Almost any city in Washington State is on kind of this hamster wheel of gravy train kickbacks, and nobody's really double checking to make sure that they actually get the services that they claim that they're delivering. Because somehow, no matter how many billions of dollars we kick out every year, the homeless problem keeps getting worse. Drug addiction keeps getting worse. Kids' test scores keep dropping. Crime keeps increasing. The environment somehow doesn't really ever get anything solved. But man, we sure have to keep increasing the amount of money we throw away into these kind of programs. Also, it's a lot easier. One of the reasons why you want to push a progressive cause is that there's a consensus around it, right? Or at least there's a consensus inside of government circles. And so if everything's going to be sinking anyway, it's much easier to do it with all hands on deck. Then there's nobody to point the finger and say, see, you're different. We could say, hey, we're all wrong. And it's a lot easier to have that consensus all around you. It kind of protects you like a cocoon when you're on the grant grifting gravy train. So I hope that this video helps you understand one of the many ways you can steal money from government and pretty much get away with it all the time. And in fact, it's happening right this minute while you're watching this video. Somebody, and usually hundreds of them, are actually putting together their next operation, find a way to find excuse to get more of your taxpayer dollars and squander it on themselves. And now you know how to do it as well. Now, in all seriousness, I'd like this to end. I would like this not to be the default position in which we live today, but it is. In order to change this, the only way you're going to have to, that we can do this, is to go in there and significantly reform. First, decrease the size of government so we aren't squandering tens of billions of dollars constantly on just total waste of money. And many of these grants, unfortunately, are just that. But until then, it's worth knowing how it operates, and I encourage you to go look in your local government and see what I'm talking about, because you'll see it almost everywhere you go. So for that, our next edition on how to steal money for local government, we probably will start talking about some of these contracts and how that works, and how a little bit of campaign contributions can go a long way toward making sure your bottom line is in much better shape after the next election cycle. So if you want to learn more, go to wethegovern.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter, and don't forget to subscribe down below. Share this video with others, and I'm always interested in your feedback. I like to respond to as many of the comments as I can, and if you think I'm totally wrong, please tell me how that's so. I always like to read contrarian voices, and it's fun to hear your feedback and what you have to say. So until then, though, remember, if you want to make a difference, you're going to have to show up, because the future belongs to those who show up.